As a creator, it's often hard to know when to bring on board management, what a good manager should look like, when they can add value, and what you should watch out for, to be completely honest. Well, today, look, I've got the perfect guest for you. Jonny Davies is a senior talent manager from Sixteenth, an award-winning creator management agency who represents some of the world's most influential creators and entrepreneurs and B2B creators like Ali Abdaal, Klymenko, and Squibb. If you've ever wanted to know how to get a manager, what's the big value add that they should expect?
The difference between agent and manager.
How, if they can potentially elevate your creator journey, this episode is maybe started with a passion and then it kind of built into a business, is ultimately monetization sources, so that they can get off the sort of the content and hamster wheel. Do you find from your roster and from observations are the most reliable?
The really important part, which I think a lot of creators miss and a lot of agencies miss, is...
So, Jonny, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. So let's start with how you've seen the landscape of the creator economy change over the last couple of years, specifically kind of concerning B2B creators.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. First of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. It's an interesting one. I think from the B2B perspective, we've seen a lot, or I guess it's become more clear how lucrative and how important having a profile and having a personal brand can be. And off the back of that, you're seeing more and more sort of traditional business people or entrepreneurs come into the space and start working on their personal brand, which is a really interesting comparison to having the sort of traditional creator come up on one side and then people that have already made it big in business coming in from the other side. Yeah. I think short form, and everyone will say TikTok has had a huge impact, and the impact of short form specifically allows people to grow much faster to start with. So you're seeing people come in and in a year's time build these massive profiles, and I think that short form has really allowed that to flourish.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. I actually could totally see there being a position going forward where I think sort of Daniel Priestley, I don't know if you follow his stuff, but he talks a lot about the impact that having a personal brand can have. And I think the example that he gives is kind of like Cristiano Ronaldo has more followers than the 4 or 5 biggest clubs combined or something like that, because people really attract to personal brands. And because the creator economy is still developing, I could totally see a position going forward where quite a few CEOs or very influential business leaders actually have somebody who helps work with their PR and their sort of personal brand. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, the case study that everyone sees online is Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah. You look at him a couple of years ago in Congress, looking a bit like an alien, to where he is now as complete repositioning in him as a personal brand, which is an interesting example of people like to see the CEOs of companies rather than just a name. Like, people like buying from people is a phrase I always use, and I think you'll see that a lot more with emerging brands, especially, that they'll follow the likes of Prime and have these creators figurehead. And the likes of Emma Chamberlain's a great example with Chamberlain Coffee, a really traditionally hard market to get into and disrupt, but because there is that community around it and that public face, people want to buy from her rather than your average coffee brand.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And you can see it through so many examples. And Elon Musk, whatever you think of him, there's a reason that Tesla as a company trades at unbelievable multiples, and it's a lot to do with the fact that people associate Elon Musk as this crazy entrepreneur that's going to continue to defy gravity with the profits the company makes, basically. Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of focusing on that B2B, the business-to-business side, I know, for example, with the likes of, I can imagine, Squibb and so forth, you get quite a few interactions with brands and so forth. What's the difference you've noticed yourself as a manager and maybe across 16th as far as B2B creators compared to a direct consumer offering?
I think this goes for probably slightly wider than B2B and slightly into sort of either education creators, B2B creators, anyone providing real extensive value to their audience. And I think that leads to a really valuable audience. And they're, I like to say, more ready to move. So an audience that is coming to your content to learn or to pick up new skills or to develop are more valuable to brands than, say, a purely entertainment channel. I think especially on long form with a B2B creator, you're coming to learn more about business or productivity or something like that, you're there and really more engaged. You're engaged, you're looking for tips, you're looking for learnings, and then potentially a sponsorship or a promotion, if it aligns with that creator, is much more valuable than pure entertainment.
Yeah, it's kind of just like following the money at the end of the day, isn't it? It really focuses into the opportunity in the creator economy, that it's not necessarily just about the size of the audience. It's very much about what's the value of the audience, and also, without being crass about it, how close is that audience to money?
Yeah, I think it's you hit the nail on the head there with the size of audience is obviously important, but really who is the audience is equally as important. Who am I appealing to? Who's watching the videos? Who's taking lessons from them? And really focusing on that core audience, I think, is something that I suggest to all creators, is figuring out what your core audience is and then building an offering for them. And I think that leads to you being able to sort of launch businesses off the back end or do better sponsorships, because you know exactly what your core audience are there for.
Yeah, and I'm really interested about that. So as a manager, do you have kind of strategy sessions with your creators? How do you, what you've just kind of told me there, just to kind of sort of reach across the curtain, so to speak, or behind the curtain, as the phrase actually goes, do you actually have conversations in relation to the audience avatar? How does that go when you're working with them?
Yeah, absolutely. And we really do think of us as managers rather than agents. I think there's a slight distinction there. Yeah. As a manager, we see our creators as partners. So we really want to get and help them in any way we possibly can. And that comes aside from strategy, maybe potentially looking at PR offering, and loads of different factors, not just sort of deal flow and sponsorships and partnerships and things like that. For instance, with all of our creators, we do what we call a yearly vision session, where we'll gather feedback from the creator, gather feedback from brands they've worked with, other partners they might have, and sit down as a team and build this strategy deck to present back. We'll then sit down for 2-3 hours with the creator and really figure out, get aligned on the goals we're trying to achieve and how we're going to get there, make slight changes. So we have then the rest of the year to sort of act on those real target points.
That's really interesting. And do you get any, kind of pushback, or is there any dissonance that ever happens there, or do you tend to be in alignment?
I think it's always a conversation, and I think
just often a bad one. No, I'm joking.
I think as a manager, you have to really understand your creators first. I think if we went in on day one with our creator and was like, hey, we're going to do a strategy session, you should do this, this, and this, change your content entirely, you'd get laughed at every room, because the creator's built their audience. The creator knows what works, per se. So we tend to do it a couple of months in, like we said, and get as much feedback as we can when signing a new creator, and that feedback is then really helpful for sort of building out that strategy.
So has there ever been a situation with a creator where you've had to kind of not advise on a pivot, but you've kind of been like, we need to maybe change strategy, or maybe something's happened with the creator and that's caused a fundamental change?
Yeah, absolutely. I think because we're interacting with brands a lot more often than the creator themselves, we have a really nice bird's eye view on what is commercially viable and what areas of content work really nicely. We can pull examples from other creators who work with and go, well, if we made this slight pivot into this angle, it would be more commercially viable. And always we're offering this as advice and suggestions. We're never going to go, you have to change your content style.
Yeah.
But it's always it's nice to bring the thought, and then the creator might bounce back with, okay, that's interesting. How about if we tried this slight pivot angle? And you end up in a sort of a middle ground a lot of the time.
Yeah, and that kind of that comes into one of my big questions, which I think is going to be really valuable for the audience. But what should, just very simply, what should they expect from a manager? What does a manager do? What's the kind of the big value add that they should expect?
I think it differs. There's a lot of different offerings across the industry, and that is a real challenge when you are a creator looking for management. Like I said earlier, there's a very stark difference between agent and manager, and that's often a bit cloudy. I think from an agent point of view, it's very, like in the US, they have this big agent-manager model, where it's very, you have an agent and they're very transactional. I'll send you a message when I have a brand deal, yes or no, okay, then there you go. You won't hear from me until the next one. Whereas management, as we like to see it, is very much always on. It is, as much as it can be, 360 support in terms of strategy, of course, that financial side of it, but also working on positioning. and how we can best maximize deal flow, look at potential other revenues like podcast, book. So it all sort of amalgamates under management. And I'm talking to my creators constantly. I think from what you should expect, I think, as I said, it's different for every management. So having that upfront conversation when you do look at signing with someone is the most important thing. And I think knowing what questions to ask when having a meeting with a management for the first time is super important to figuring out what exactly they're offering in comparison to maybe another agency that could be offering you a roster spot.
Yes. So what are the big questions from your side? Because you must have seen, you must have sat in a lot of these meetings, been part of the pitches, brought people on board, probably heard the dark side of it as far as things that didn't go so well. What are the key questions that a creator should ask a prospective manager?
I think first looking at the manager's roster. Okay. If you're a creator in a certain niche, seeing, okay, do they manage other creators in my niche? Do they have experience working with the types of brands I'd want to work with? Is a really good starting point. Asking the manager if they're open to sharing how many creators they manage directly. I think that's a really good tell if a manager truly is a manager or they're sort of more on that agent model. If a manager's personally responsible for 30 creators, then you're not going to get any of that person's time. Like, for instance, I manage 5 at the moment, I think, and that's as much as I'd want to.
Oh, that is pretty personalised, that, yeah.
So I very much had a lot of time to be spending with those creators and helping them with strategy and also working on their sort of commercial side of things. I think that's really important. I think then looking at being upfront and going, okay, what differentiates you as an agency, you as a manager from everybody else?
Right.
And asking that question in that meeting is very telling as to what sort of service you'd be receiving.
Yeah. So let's say somebody comes in and they've built up a substantial following and they're coming into a meeting with yourself at 16th. How those meetings typically tend to go? Is there a certain thing that as a structure that you follow or anything like that? Because I think it'll be really interesting for kind of the audience to listen to that and imagine that they're in the shoes of the prospective creator here.
Yeah, I think for us personally, it's very targeted when we're doing outreach. We'll have done a lot of research on that creator beforehand. For instance, a talent manager will bring it to the team and go, hey, I really like this creator. I think there's a lot of potential there. We'll then, as a team, discuss it and have lots of different perspectives on why it may work or a suggested pivot that we'd have to do. So we can then lead that conversation, try and find out as much information as possible from the agency side. I think then you do get those creators that are wise enough to be asking a lot of questions back, which is a really good sign from us. Yeah, I think if someone's asking questions, it's much better than, okay, yeah, let's just sign, let's do it. But it's very much a fact-finding mission to start with. It's like entering any new relationship. It's finding out exactly what the offer is, what the creator's vision is, what they want to achieve. I always ask the question, why do you create content? Or why did you first get into content? Because I think that gives a really good understanding of the motive behind everything and what they're trying to achieve through their content.
And what do you look for a creator? What gets you excited as far as potentially signing a creator?
I think there's a hell of a lot of factors that go into it. I think a presence on YouTube, a presence on long form is always something we look at. We're very much a YouTube first agency.
Okay.
Because we think that there's a lot more sustainability in YouTube and long form. And it's a sort of more rare, I think, with TikTok coming in and the rise of the short form creator, the ability to hold an audience for a long time is rare and so valuable.
Yeah, that is interesting. Do you I've heard people talk about TikTok compared to long form and almost as if like a following on TikTok's worth kind of a quarter of a following on YouTube. Do you have any particular house views on things like that?
I wouldn't say a quarter. I think they are
annoyed everyone on TikTok, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is different. I think the ability to hold a long form audience is very valuable. I'm not disregarding TikTok and Instagram. I think a lot of people do incredible work on there. But I think YouTube is a real sign of that core audience is again really strong. If you've got that audience on YouTube that is watching for a 45-minute video, you really are offering value, and that audience is buying into what you're saying or what you're sharing.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things with YouTube is that there can be quite a disparity between subscribers and engaged viewers. Do you look really closely into the health of the channel?
Yeah, I think for me, subscribers is a bit of a vanity metric. Yeah. I'm much more looking at views, and watch time I think is really, really key. If watch time is really high, then that's really, really exciting. The other one is engagement rate, and that goes for across all different socials. I think if an engagement rate is really high on Instagram, that's a really good sign that the creators community is really healthy.
And on that, so that they're kind of very much the metrics. When you're talking with the creator in the initial stages, there's a certain amount you can use various tools to kind of track, get a good approximation of the audience engagement. Is that a point where the creator would kind of, open up the YouTube analytics and go over the details with you, or is it something that you tend to do research prior and then discuss with the creator? How much do you go into the metrics?
It's a bit of both. We'll do some research prior with some of the tools we have, but then we also do ask, especially on YouTube, for audience demographics and screenshots, just to make sure that, especially with region, their sort of audience region aligns with the sponsors that we work with, because that's really, really important in terms of rates, quite frankly, but also then sort of suitability for those sponsors.
Yeah, and are there any particular areas that kind of make your eyes light up as far as, oh wow, this is a great area to get into for creators?
I think it has to be true to you. I think people will, if you're talking about a subject that is not of interest to you personally, then it's very hard to convey that it is on a YouTube channel, and people will see that. So I think first, the real question as a creator is thinking, okay, what am I really interested in? How can I tell that story? And working on the story rather than necessarily the topic. I think education content is really financially viable. I think it does really well. You can build a really strong community and sort of offer products to that community. And that education being sort of business education, productivity education. Even Max Klymenko is a fantastic example of education. He started his channel as a way to sort of explain marketing topics to his younger sister, and it's sort of grown into this explaining really complex topics to the younger generation. So I think that's a really interesting area, but it's about finding that exciting area for you to explore. Like for him, it started so small and has grown out from there, and I think that's a nice way to look at it, is finding what's really exciting to you, working on that, and it will naturally expand.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's kind of like having like a zone of genius, so to speak, and a real interest. And then one of the things I think is becoming clearer and clearer is that you've got to layer it with actual authenticity, and maybe the authenticity is coming from your years of business experience, or maybe it's coming from your absolute passion. But I do think you're seeing more and more, and I don't know how it's happening. I'm guessing it's probably to do with the algorithm engagement and just human behavior, but you're seeing stuff start to resonate. It's got to come from a more and more authentic source. There's not many people blagging it nowadays and doing really well, or I think fewer and fewer are anyway.
There was a study I read recently. I can't remember the name of it, but it was fascinating in terms of what an audience member values most. And I think for millennials, it was that authenticity piece. Okay. But for Gen Z, it was more relatability. So I think potentially if you have an older audience, authenticity is even more important. And those education channels tend to have sort of their age demographic tends to be slightly higher.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I hadn't really thought about it as far as the split. Yeah, that is interesting. So one of the hardest kind of areas for creators, especially if they're someone who maybe started with a passion and then it kind of built into a business, is ultimately monetization sources, so that they can get off the sort of the content hamster wheel, basically, to avoid burnout. As a manager, you're kind of seeing firsthand creators build revenue sources. What do you find from your roster and from observations are the most reliable?
I think reliable is a difficult word, because with anything, reliability is difficult, right? And I think if I came in and said, oh, do a course, that's reliable, that works for some people. It doesn't work for a lot of others. Yeah. I think the real question is, I'm going to steal from Colin and Samir here, who are brilliant. Yeah. The market product fit, or the audience product fit, finding something again that really resonates with your core audience. If you are going to build a business, it's focusing on that real center. and the most engaged audience. I think stuff like mailing lists and newsletters are a brilliant way to find out who that is.
Yeah.
And then figuring out, okay, how can I provide something of value to them rather than the audience as a whole? For instance, with Ali Abdaal, his part-time YouTube Academy has been an incredible success, and that was all built off his newsletter.
Yeah.
So there was barely any advertising or promotion across his socials. It was all built from that newsletter audience.
Yeah.
Which is a great case study in terms of really knowing what they want and catering to them.
I think the good thing about, and I think Ali's probably said this before, but the good thing about a newsletter audience, apart from the fact you own it, so that you're not going to.
Yeah.
Because I was at dinner last night, and it was mentioned that there were some relatively big creators in the room, and basically he was just talking about a story that quite a few had things, just random stuff like Instagram accounts, YouTube channels, basically just taken off. And if that's your primary source, if that's your only connection to your audience, you're in real trouble. But a newsletter, at least, it sounds old-fashioned, and if I'm being honest, I completely pooh-poohed it for ages. It's such a stupid thing to do. It's the most intimate way of connecting with your audience in some ways, especially if you do it in the right way. I think Ali does a really good job with his kind of weekly kind of...
Sunday snippets.
Yeah, Sunday snippet, that's it, isn't it? But also you get to control the cadence, and it doesn't open you up quite as much to... I hate using this example constantly, but it's the most forefront in my mind, which is like the yes theory issue, where you go out to a large audience and then 10% of the audience really don't like the offer that you've given, but because of the magnification of the comments and because everybody reads the comments, they go, oh wow, everyone hates it, when actually it's only a small percentage of the audience that hates it.
And it is a very vocal minority in that instance. I think there's definitely a strategy around how, if you are a creator that wants to launch businesses, I would always say start with that really core audience. Focus on that. And you can also be getting feedback from that core audience, which is really, really valuable.
Yeah. And, you will have seen a lot now in relation to kind of the different sources of revenue that a creator will bring. And obviously without saying anything that would, be out of confidence, what typical splits do you tend to see from a normal roster as far as the income sources?
I think the majority of creators are still very AdSense and sponsorship heavy.
Oh, really?
I think that is the majority of cases. It is very hard to build businesses as a creator, especially brick and mortar products or something you can hold in your hand.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult, especially as a short form creator particularly. So the majority are sponsorship. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think my advice would be just develop your inventory as a creator. So look at it as if you are an Instagrammer, for instance. If your only sponsorship inventory is on Instagram, you're then trapped in that sort of what you can offer to a brand. I think if you had a podcast, if you had a newsletter, if you had a YouTube channel, if you had all these other sources where sponsorship works, that then is a much more reliable and more diversified income stream. Yeah, and one of the comments I've heard in relation to sponsorships is always just being mindful that when you're taking on board a sponsor, yes, it's easier as far as a transactional basis because you're just basically promoting their product. But the downside is that if they're willing to pay you X to promote a brand, then there's a certain amount of goodwill that you could maybe extract through your own business. So there's quite a few creators who have decided just to build their own thing and build their own product off the back of it. Do you have any thoughts in relation to whether a creator should try and, so let's say, you're give an example of your kind of someone who's doing fashion on Instagram. Do you think it's a good idea for creators to try and build their own fashion business and then monetize off the back of that, or do you think it's better to stick on the sponsorship position? I think you have to, if it's of interest to that creator, then I think that's great. I think first start with the interest. If you think you like the idea of growing a business, obviously incredibly difficult, but I'd test. I wouldn't jump in and spend £1 million on clothes and put it in a warehouse. Yeah, I'd reach out to a brand and, hey, can we do an edit together or something like that? Can we do a co-branded collection? Test that, see what sales are like, and then off the back of that, you have much more information and knowledge about, okay, is this going to be well received? or is it too much of a risk?
Yeah, and some examples that come to mind are Grace Beverley's done phenomenally well. Chrissy Scheller, I think, has done phenomenally well with Honor Active. They're kind of really examples of it. But what you see from socials is those girls work really hard. It's a real lifestyle. If you're wanting to build a business, like you're going to have to work all the time. And there is understandably, you are taking on the sort of the business risk, the entrepreneurial risk. I think what makes it great for creators to eventually potentially build a business is ultimately the great thing about a business is that it's beyond your personal brand. Because the one big challenge, I was doing a podcast yesterday, and the one thing that was said is that the problem with creator businesses is they're very rarely saleable because there's so much linked in with that individual. For example, like if Ali Abdaal was to step away from his YouTube channel and get somebody else in, that transition is probably either going to take forever or lose a lot of it.
It's very difficult, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think there is a hell of a lot of opportunity, and I don't want to be a naysayer and go, if you're a creator, don't start a business. I think there's a lot of risk, but a hell of a lot of opportunity off platform. And I think even what you said with the newsletter, that idea of taking some of your business off platform is really good.
Yeah.
And I think starting with that is my main thing is, okay, find out what that core audience is. It doesn't have to be a newsletter, but something off platform before making a huge investment. So taking the right baby steps off platform, rather than potentially jumping at the deep end. But there is tremendous value in businesses off platform because you have that funnel. You have that sales funnel of your audience. As long as the product fit or the service fit is right, then there is that direct line.
Yeah, and I think that's I was chatting on my first podcast with Damien, who's a finance creator, and we were just talking about kind of his audience, and I think that's the real kind of opportunity in the creative economy for creators when you get to a certain stage, which is that it's not just about necessarily eyeballs, it's about the level of trust that you can potentially transmit across with your audience.
Yes.
Because it's all well and good having, I think Damien mentioned he gets something like 1 million views a month at the moment, which is really healthy, but also his audience is very engaged as well. And that's so much more than somebody who is looking at a billboard or maybe picking up the FT or whatever, just kind of flicking through things. It's that engaged audience. So, Jonny, if a creator is listening to this, at what point do you think a creator should take on management?
I think there's no rush is the first thing, which may sound strange coming out of a manager's mouth. I think understanding the business a little bit is really useful, especially if you're going into a conversation with a manager, really understanding actually what they're saying is really important. So my colleague Beth always says, do a year on your own. I think that's wise. I'm not sure it works in every scenario. I think the other thing is probably don't sign with the first agency that sends you an email. Really do think about it. See who other people are managed by. And then make an informed decision rather than just going, oh, they look cool, they want to sign me, let's do it. Which is easier said than done when it's all exciting, all new, you're building an audience, and then somebody comes in and goes, hey, I can make you loads of money.
Sells the dream.
Exactly, yeah.
Is there a revenue point where, because at the end of the day, managers have to be able to make money themselves, of course they do. Is there a revenue threshold guide, basically?
I think, again, then it probably comes back to our manager versus agent question. Is if a manager's managing, say in my case, 5 creators, there is that sort of need for me to be making them enough money for me to bring enough money to the agency.
Yeah.
So I think it depends. I think smaller creators, a lot of the agencies that have lots of smaller creators, it is that agent model where it's a lot of creators to one manager. Of course, I think, again, management and what we do a lot at 16th is if we see a huge amount of potential in somebody for growth, then that revenue question is a bit less important. I think from a creator point of view, it has to be additive. The manager has to be additive. If they're just going to come in and manage your inbox and take whatever percentage, then you're going to be losing out. So it's really asking the question, what am I getting from this? Is deal flow really going to improve? Am I going to be getting additional services? Am I going to be getting strategy support?
Yeah, that's interesting. And as far as your position with 16th, do you tend to focus on larger creators and only a very few smaller ones, or do you tend to just do it on a case by case basis or a creator by creator basis?
It's a pretty much creator by creator basis. We tend to split it out into different niches. So for me, it's a huge amount of focus on B2B creators and gaming creators, and then looking at those who are already doing an amazing job, or those that we think are doing an amazing job and the audience isn't quite there yet, but it will be there. So looking at those that we think will grow really fast.
And what should a creator not look for from a manager? You know, what may be some experiences have you had where the creators kind of come in with expectations and you've had to manage them?
I think don't expect everything to change immediately. Like there's always the example from an acting agent. People think, as soon as I've got an acting agent, I've made it. I'll get all these roles.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in the creator industry, it's not that gatekeepy. Whereas the brands don't just come to agencies and go, hey, who have you got? So creators can do it on their own.
Yeah.
I think there's almost we call it taking a creator to market as well. When a creator first signs, we have to spend a lot of time getting all our clients and brands familiar with that face. So things don't switch overnight, but it's a process. I think in terms of what not to expect, again, that's a conversation you have at the very beginning. It's finding out and speaking to the management, okay, what are you offering? And then not expecting things beyond that. So if you have that upfront conversation, both parties are on the same page, and then you can both hold each other accountable to that.
So how many times are you in contact with because if you're doing with 5, I can imagine it's pretty frequent.
Yeah, I speak to probably, if not all my creators every day.
Oh, really?
Yeah, whether that's on message or calls, and then we have sort of bi-weekly calls set up as well.
Nice. Very quickly, if you are enjoying this episode and you'd like to find out more about how to go from being a creator to financially independent, then please sign up to my Creative Finance Masterclass. It's a 4-day, completely free email course on the key lessons on what real wealth is, how to build it and maintain it. So you can either check out the description here to sign up or go to www.creativefinance.co.uk. Thanks. So you talked about kind of the manager-agent distinction as far as kind of styles, as far as, you know, an agent may be quite transactional, maybe quite high volume, but a manager is quite kind of long-term focused. It's really interesting you say that, because in financial planning, we've kind of got this thing that we kind of talk about kind of 2 different terms. So we say financial advisor, that's people that just used to do product sales and they just sell you a pension and all the rest of it. But financial planner, they're people who do long-term focus, all about planning and making sure we're there for the long term. So I kind of, when you said that, I was like, oh, that's very similar to what we said. We got to the position where we started using titles so much so that people got really confused. Yeah.
And
the normal person was like, what the hell are you on about?
It's the same here, right? There is a massive confusion, especially in the UK, around manager versus agent, because everybody calls himself a manager.
Yeah.
Whereas in the US, it's very different. And they will have a manager and an agent if you're at a certain level, and the agent will work with the manager. So it's a sort of different model, and there's sort of merits to both.
What does a bad experience look like?
I think it's very much, if it's not additive, like I said, if it is, okay, I'm going to take on your inbox, I'll manage your emails, and then I'll just sit there and take my percentage. If you're not bringing value, whether that's strategic, whether that's helping negotiate and increase rates, whether that's adding other areas of support that you can offer. I think the bad example is you don't hear from your manager. They're just managing your inbox. They're not bringing anything to the table. And it does happen, I think.
Are there any contractual things as far as are there like kind of restrictions in restrictive covenants effectively for manager contracts where it's like, okay, we're going to manage you for this time and you can't go elsewhere? Is there any kind of practice like that?
Yeah, and there can be horror stories around it. I think going back to the previous question about what to ask in a meeting with a manager, is how long that term is really important. Like for us, it's very much we have a 3-month probation period where either party can terminate.
Yeah. And
then beyond that, we do 1 year rolling. I think anything longer than that is a bit madness. I've seen creators, or I've heard of creators that are locked into 3-year deals.
Oh, really?
Which is sad and insane. So I think a 1 year rolling, but having that probation period is really nice to allow you both to go, actually, yeah, this is really working. Let's do it properly.
I like the idea of things like that are good as well, because it's kind of and it kind of just shows, it talks kind of the integrity that obviously you operate at 16th, because ultimately it's a signal of long-term intention.
Yes.
You know, Rory Sutherland's kind of this marketing guy, and he talks a lot about the importance of kind of signaling long-term intent. And I really like things like that, because it's one of those where if it's a good mutually beneficial relationship, then you don't necessarily worry about locking people in. And
Exactly. Yeah.
the thing that I really liked about this, so I'm getting one of my next guests is going to be a solicitor, and the one that kind of the key aims through this podcast is just trying to hopefully give creators a bit more of an indication of how all the different parts of the creator economy work in relation to whether, you know, when they're expected to sign contracts, because I totally understand. Especially if you've not got a business background, you know, you've just done really well. Yeah. And now you've got a load of people throwing contracts and, you know, coming on board and all the rest of it. It must be an absolute minefield to try and sort of, to navigate it all. In relation to, if you can just talk me through, you know, so you've got a creator, you're then the manager. Who do you tend to correspond with as part of their, as far as kind of the brands, the GDPR? Do you talk, you know, what kind of professionals do you correspond with as far as the sort of the ecosystem around the creator?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. On the creator side, you've got the creator. A lot of mine now have teams. So I work with Ali. I work really well with Angus, who's his general manager internally. On the other side, it's very much brands, big PR agencies. If we need to bring in specialized legal support, that's something that we can do. And we have great relationships there. The other side of it is, again, PR. That's an offering we're now doing internally if we think a creator needs PR support. There's a lot of different moving parts in terms of that side of the industry, and it really, again, depends on a case-by-case basis what's necessary. But I do advise creators, especially when signing with a management, is have a lawyer check over a talent agency contract.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to Angus, is one of the things I think has been mentioned. I think this is a real challenge for any creator who's growing. It's almost as if you want to bring on a host of specialists, but actually sometimes when a creator's growing, the most important role can be someone who can be a real generalist.
Yes. Yeah.
And who can fulfill multiple tasks for a creator.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you end up having several thumbnail provider and all the rest of it, and you've got 7 kind of effectively freelancers that are now on salaries, as opposed to one very effective generalist who can tick off lots of boxes.
Yeah, and Angus is pretty remarkable. I think he came in...
He's just the exception. Angus, you hired.
Yeah. He came in very early as a script writer for Ali and a researcher, and has sort of developed into this amazing general manager. So he probably is the exception.
Yeah.
But I think working with freelancers, again, is a great way to go about it in terms of editing or thumbnail design while you're growing, rather than locking yourselves into having a full-time team straight away.
Yeah, I think finding that Angus, it's going to be laughing watching this, is really difficult, especially the creators I speak to. I think they really struggle to, because ultimately you're wanting somebody to, I've got a creator client who's brought on board his brother, because he's also really talented in the area, and it's great if you've got someone who can fulfill all the roles, but really challenging if you don't.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about kind of the ethos behind 16th, because this is one of the key reasons why I want to get you on, Jonny, and also talk about, because I really like this. What is good influence defined by 16th?
I think it takes on a number of different sort of positions in different niches. I think for me, it's providing tremendous value to the audience. And being a good influence on that audience. I think that, again, can look very different in different niches. With business, it can be providing genuine business advice and value there. With lifestyle, it can be providing sort of a real genuine look into someone's life and not sugarcoating it and offering value and support there. But it's that core ethos of looking after your audience and not... or really providing value. I think value is a word I use a hell of a lot, and really going and providing as much free value as possible.
Yeah, it's kind of like the ethos of being additive as opposed to subtractive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it might be another thing that Rory Sutherland said, but he's kind of like talked about social media sometimes, and he sort of talks about so much social media sometimes can be whittled down to I'm rich, you're not. I've got a 6-pack, you don't. It's basically kind of the look at me thing. But actually, the real creators, the ones that I really like, are ones who it's a platform for their ideas, and it's ultimately about growing or enhancing the lifestyle, the thinking of their audience, and really bringing something to the table.
Yeah. And Ali's a really good example of that. Is they're not I'm a productivity guru, do all the things that I say and you'll be a better person. It's hey, I'm learning all these things, I'm going to share them. And Ali just loves teaching. So it's the teaching what I'm learning angle adds that real value.
Yeah, and he's been a really fantastic example of someone who's show your work. He's kind of done that across the board, even, and also the vulnerability, especially with the one I watched recently was the keyboard.
Yes,
one.
yeah,
That's a good example, isn't it? And it's good to see creators who can be upfront enough about that and don't just show the highlight reel, because it's so tempting, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And social media very much is that. It's the highlight reel of someone's life.
Yeah,
and we like the idea of giving as much truth and honesty and as possible.
Yeah. So Topical has come out in the news recently. I think it's Shen. Yeah, I've never shopped there, but it's basically a Chinese fashion retailer. It's got plans to float in the UK for about 50 billion. It's got a lot of allegations of forced labour and so forth. Allegations, got to protect myself legally. But the brand's also grown by using a lot of influencers, creators to really kind of to get into the market. Is that anything that you think about in 16th in relation to use it as far as when you approach brands, when you consider brands?
Yeah, absolutely. One of our core values as a company is long-term strategy over short-term gain, and I think that very much is a part of that conversation. When we sign a creator, we set up what we call a brand directory for them, and it's sort of a collaborative Notion space. We both go in and put some brands in and go, okay, these are my favorite brands, these are my absolute no-goes, and so on and so on. And I think having that from the outset, putting your morals as an agency and putting your morals as a creator into the no-go brands, it's then a lot easier to stick to that when an offer comes with a big paycheck on it.
Yeah.
Because I think in the moment, it's a lot easier to compromise on your morals, but if you've both agreed ahead of time, these are my no-goes, then it's a lot easier to sort of stick to that.
Yeah, you then just don't have to think about the money, I guess.
Yes.
Just fake monopoly money that's never been on the table.
And I think the other side of it is there is always to think of long-term strategy and how will this affect my long-term strategy. I could take this brand deal here with a brand I don't align with for the paycheck, but it won't align my audience. It won't perform well. They'll get frustrated. That's really important, or it won't look good on a media kit. It won't look good to other brands. So you do have to think long-term strategy. And I think having an agency that instills that thought process into a creator is really powerful, because it looks after your long-term career rather than just in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful on the just the idea of bringing aboard a professional who sees this not only through your vision, because you can never be objective to your own circumstances. It's impossible. So just to have someone who's got the experience in relation to, they've done this a few times, they've seen it across the industry go well and badly, and they can kind of give you real feedback on that. Because, again, topical, but the Financial Conduct Authority is basically looking at prosecuting quite a few influencers for basically promoting financial instruments without the authorization. And I think it would be fair to say that a lot of some of the creator economy been a bit of a wild west in relation to brand deals. And I think that's an area that creators are going to have to be more and more careful on going forward, as far as not only for their sustainability, as far as, I want to project integrity. That's about the long-term vision of what I want to be about, but also just frankly the legal ramifications.
Yeah. And we saw it recently with Grace Beverley and the ASA.
That's a really good example, actually. Yeah,
I think the ASA are being very difficult. I don't agree with that ruling.
I agree with what you. I didn't agree with that either. Yeah, but
because they just aren't clear.
Yeah.
With their rulings and with their rules. But it's an interesting case study to look at and go, okay, we have to look at this. We have to take this into consideration, and that becomes part of strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great example. Do you think there's a difference between the influencer industry and the creator economy?
I think there is, but I think they both very much feed into each other and interact with each other. I think the creators themselves are in the creator economy. Creator businesses I see as in the creator economy. I think influencer marketing is very much brand side and agency side. But of course, the brand side and agency side feeds into the creator economy.
Yeah. And one of the things I like about 16th, and I picked this up from your website, is that it's about the idea behind it is 16th minute as opposed to 15 minutes of fame.
Yeah.
What is it as far as the key qualities of the creators who you see certainly starting out, which you think, okay, I think you're going to go somewhere, versus the ones that you kind of think, okay, this is going to be a short thing?
I think there's a tremendous amount of hard effort that goes into, and hard work that goes into being a creator. It often gets belittled, but I think there is an incredible amount of hard work and discipline. I think that's really important as someone that really wants to be a creator, really enjoys it. I think the other thing is creators that think about it like a business, have that business mindset is really important. I think then again, for us, I go back to the old wording of just adding tremendous value.
Yeah.
I think if you are constantly adding value to your audience, it's hard to go wrong. If the audience feels like you're taking from them, then it will go away very quickly. But if it feels like they're getting unbelievable value for free, again, then I think that will continue to grow.
Yeah, I think also it's kind of the big, and you've got to be careful, because if you go too much that way, sometimes, it's kind of, you just end up giving away free stuff forever and never making anything, a living out of it. And I think creators absolutely should always be thinking about, how can I make this sustainable? Yeah. Like, at the end of it, so my kind of background before I got into finance is I was a brief period, I was a professional musician, and there was a time that we just had no money. And it is impossible to do good creative work when you are always worrying about money.
Yeah.
So I was saying this to Damien in my first podcast. I was like, he said creators have a duty to become financially secure. They have a duty to make sure they're in a position to, especially if they're educational, because they're ultimately doing something which is good for their audience. So they need security to do their best work. But I think as far as kind of like, I'll pivot now to kind of sort of brand deals and so forth. You were talking just before we started today in relation to, you've had a lot of brand deals come up with some creators. I can imagine a lot of that's because you work with some exceptional creators. But what's the standard cadence, kind of frequency that a creator with management should expect from a brand, kind of a quarter for a brand?
Yeah, I think it very much varies. At 16th, we're really proud that we have a really high decline rate from creators, which
as
sounds
you declining or they
as
declining?
In creators declining brand deals.
Oh, right.
Which I think is a really weird stat, but I think it's one we're really proud of, is that we're deciding which brands to work with and making that choice, which then the audience sees that and goes, okay, these are only working with brands that really align with them, really align with their content, and as such, you get much higher engagement from it. I think that's important to consider as a creator. In terms of cadence, again, it varies creators to creator. And there's lots of different ways of looking at it. If you are on a really high cadence, could you look at increasing your rates to bring that down and still be making more money so you have more time to be doing organic content? So that's something we're constantly discussing. Again, how much inventory do you have to fill? That again plays into it. And if you think you are at capacity, how can we as a management help you unlock more capacity, whether that's through helping with hiring or sort of figuring out structure in your team to better unlock capacity or to better place your time elsewhere. So there's so many factors that come into it. It's hard to say, this is the cadence when working with 16. You'll have a brand deal in your inbox every morning.
Yeah. I'm sure that's what everyone watching will be. That's what I was expecting. That's what we said in the interview. So talk me through then, if you don't mind, because I think this will be really useful just for somebody listening, especially if they're a creator kind of on the journey. You're getting a brand deal, start to finish. You'll obviously be supporting throughout this, but what do you expect as far as going from you've had the offer to the content's been signed off? I'm not expecting kind of a Justin Moore-esque course here, but I think it would be useful to talk through.
So one of the ways we're unique as an agency is we have 2 team members to every talent.
Right.
So every talent will have a talent manager and then a campaign manager.
Right.
So from that we can offer, again, 2 perspectives on strategy. The campaign manager is very much focused on content and how we can make the best ads or the best sponsored content. In terms of a deal flow, it will look like, are we doing sort of outreach or inbounds or pitching? That will then come through to offer, negotiation. Once that contract's signed, we will have a brief put into our template ticket what we call it, or briefing document. That will be then sent to the creator, and the campaign manager will help them figure out how to do the best concept or the best return brief. And then it will go down that line in terms of filming, and if there are any amends, then amends to upload. And then the real important part, which I think a lot of creators miss and a lot of agencies miss, is the bit after. I think the deal doesn't end from a management point of view when the contract's signed and the money is, or when the video goes live and the money is paid. That follow up, and that we do a lot of reporting. So we'll collect all the stats, a lot of qualitative and quantitative feedback on the content, and send that in a nice report to the brand, and then restart that conversation.
Yeah.
It's very easy, especially as a solo creator, just to go, hey, done that deal.
Yeah.
Let's go and relax or move on to the next one. But I think that continuous conversation with the same brand is really important, and repitching or pitching a longer term deal is a huge part of it.
Yeah, that's the one thing I remember from the Justin Moore thing that he always says, which is so right, which is that, you've done all the hard work, you've landed the contract, even if things doesn't feel like things have gone well, it's your duty to go back to the brand and communicate and keep that relationship live. Because worst case scenario, they're going to tell you, oh, it was dreadful and never working with you again, see you later. But at least you've then been professional. But in a lot of instances, you're either going to get great data or you're going to capture an ongoing relationship, which is way more valuable. Yeah,
and I think the attitude has to be, how can we build long-term relationships with the creator?
Yeah.
Because then that does, as you say, allow you to get a bit off the hamster wheel. In an ideal world, if you're an influencer, having 5 partners, perfect. If they're doing a video each every month, that's the best way to do it, rather than having a random sponsorship here, one pop-up there. 5 partners, a schedule ahead of time, that's the dream scenario in my mind.
Yeah.
So working on building those long-term partners as part of that sort of long-term strategy is super important. And like you said, even if the worst case scenario is the brand goes, oh, it didn't perform well, you didn't make any sales. Well, then it offers an opportunity to go back with, hey, well, why don't we try this CTA? Why don't we try approaching it a different way this time and test it again?
Yeah.
So there's no bad answer, I think, if you ask for feedback.
Yeah, it also just makes you look way more professional, doesn't it? And it's just generally to act in that way. Do you have issues? Do you ever see issues with revisions, as far as you've been given a brief and for whatever reason that doesn't necessarily reflect what the brand wanted, whether they did or didn't necessarily articulate that?
So we're very, very process heavy on the brand side, and we set out our expectations very early. We won't sign a contract unless we already have a brief.
Right.
It's like asking someone to sign an employment contract but not telling them what their job description will be. And agencies expect it, and I think it's mad. So we're very much, okay, we need to see the brief. We need to know what sort of content we'll be going out with. Once that's approved, then we can move to contracting.
Yeah.
The other thing is we only allow objective amends, what we call. So once the brief is sent over and a concept is sent back, we'll only allow amends on the video if they have objectively missed the brief that you provided.
Right.
Because I think if you allow subjective amends, there's this endless right from the brand to have a back and forth going, oh, can you tweak that? Can you refilm that?
Yeah.
And it just gets very expensive in terms of the time the creator's using, the filming time. So having that strict rule on objective amends is really, really helpful in terms of making that as smooth a process as possible.
Yeah, and that's another, I guess, example of why it's helpful to have managers like yourself who can actually legitimately go back and it not be, because I can imagine a solo creator, maybe you're comfortable doing that and you feel like, yeah, that's fine, but it's so much easier if you've got a manager who's got the support of a team behind, who's done tons of time saying, no, brand, you're being unreasonable. This is what we agreed.
and I think, again, right, we have such good relationships with all these brands we work with for years that there's an understanding that this is how it is if you're with 16th. Whereas I think as a solo creator, it is hard. First of all, negotiations are potentially harder because the brand sees you as, oh, they're just on their own, they're just a creator. And then on the sort of contractor side again, and getting those amend clauses in, if the agency knows it's coming, then they're more likely to.
And one question I did ask, and I don't know whether I'm going to put this in the front of the podcast or not, but maybe someone's listening to this in the audience and they would actually love one day to be a manager. And you're a great example of a successful creative manager. How did you get into it, and how do people get into it?
So it was always my dream job to be an agent or a manager of some description. I there's a great quote by Eddie Hearn that says, I was a failed sports star, so I became a manager to be as close as possible. So for me, I was a failed rugby player. That was always the dream going up. So I thought, okay, I'll just be a sports agent. Did a bit of work as a football agent. Did my law degree because I thought that was the best angle to be as equipped as possible as a manager. And then worked my way into the industry and just sort of obsessed with that creator economy. I think there's no right path to getting into it. I think you can come from a PR angle, you can come from an agency side angle. I think just an obsession with YouTube is really helpful, an obsession with creators and the creator economy, and absorbing as much information, watching. There's so many great podcasts out there, hopefully like this one, that you can get so much information about it, that absorbing that and becoming a real expert in the field is a great way to go about getting into the industry.
Yeah, and speaking of that then, as far as kind of like your passion for the creator economy, what do you think are the big opportunities in the creator economy?
I think there's opportunity everywhere, which is a bit of a non-answer.
That's a non-answer. Not taking that.
I think we're very much...
Be specific.
We're very much at the start. I think this is going to be... it is, in my mind, it is still the future of entertainment, the future of business. I think there's so much opportunity. Like we said at the start of the podcast, the opportunity for creator-led brands is enormous.
Yeah.
Adding a community to a brand, I think, is super, super powerful. Having a face and a community. Like we said, people like buying from people.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to go in and disrupt a market if you don't have that personality behind the brand.
Yeah.
And you see that a hell of a lot with, like, in clothing, you have like Represent, who's their CEO, is very, very active on socials and is building around him. Yeah. Minted New York is another clothing brand, which is with Marcus Malone, who's amazing at creating this, I'm growing a business content, which is then fascinating and more appealing to buy from them because you're part of that journey. So I think there's a hell of a lot of opportunity there in terms of telling the story of building a brand and being a creator building a brand.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I actually think Represent's a fantastic example. There are more and more examples. You could say even Ben Francis with Gymshark. That was very much, it kind of feels old hat at the time, but actually at the time it was very innovative in relation to how they went about it, the use of influencers, creators to grow the brand. Obviously Ben only started doing proper kind of day in the life stuff in the last few years, but that's another really good example. And if you have any type of business, the first thing you're going to do once you've got the brilliant product is you're going to spend money on marketing and hopefully see if you can actually get product market fit. And for the market to both say, yeah, this works, it's a hell of a lot easier when you've already got an audience that you can start testing things out. Do you see there any kind of, because I think Ali might even be looking at kind of things like SaaS products and all the rest of it at the moment. Are there any creators, obviously without giving out anything in confidence, or any creators you see that are moving into certain areas of business, like either SaaS or whether starting their own agency or anything like that?
I think Simon Squibb and the Help Bank team. Yeah. So he has this Help Bank business, and they're a fantastic example of they're building a business that has the community for entrepreneurs. They can come in, ask questions, get free advice, but then there's also services that come along with that. So they now have an email marketing service called Help Bank Campaign, and that is a business that it's the product fit is just so correct because it's that community of entrepreneurs. Then building an email marketing business is the perfect fit because you'd rather have the community benefit than going with a different email marketing provider. So I think that works really nicely. I think building paid communities, again, works really nicely. Ali's got Productivity Lab, which is a paid productivity community. So I think there's definitely the opportunity to build these businesses. But again, those two examples are hammering my point of audience product fit. Yeah. With Ali, it's the world's biggest productivity expert, a paid productivity community. Simon, now one of the biggest business creators in the world, and these entrepreneurship and business tools. So that's a sort of a really good example of how important that product fit is.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I do want to touch upon, because I think it's something that maybe doesn't get talked about enough, is the challenges of the creator economy. And you'll have seen that firsthand if you're speaking with the creators every single day. I can imagine not all of those messages will have been overwhelmingly positive. Speak with anyone every day, you're going to get some crap. What do you see as far as patterns? What are the things that tend to keep a creator up at night?
I think that it is, especially when you're starting, it can be a hamster wheel, like we said.
Yeah.
The algorithm is pretty unforgiving with a break. Yeah. So looking about how you can do that well and how you can schedule filming into certain days of the week is a really good way of going about it. Yeah. To manage that. The other thing again is creative freedom. People hate getting briefs where I have to just read this into the camera, because the creator knows it's not going to perform very well. The creator knows the audience are going to find it irritating. So it's a huge part of my job is educating brands and going, we really don't want to do this. There's a much better way. Let us have a bit of control. So finding that balance is hard. And it all plays into the long-term strategy. If you have long-term partners, then you're way more likely that they're going to trust you and trust your creative direction.
Yeah, I also think as well, I think it's, if at the end of the day, kind of going back to that example I mentioned a second ago about the difference in the creator economies, the great thing about it is the audience, the transfer of trust, really, for want of a better word, from the creator to the audience. And it's the fact that the trust is way, way higher than through conventional direct advertising, yes, conventional media and all the rest of it, because you're transferring that. To the same extent, if you're plugging a brand, people can sniff out immediately if you're just reading it off through an auto prompt and, you're really not engaged with it. I really like what My First Million do, because they do the thrill of the shill, where they just kind of make it a little bit fun. They just kind of, try and make it quite interesting and do it as which is part of their kind of personalities. Do you get a lot of pushback, as far as brands, often do they give briefs and you're just like, we're going to need to find some other way of doing this? I
think it's varied. And I feel for this more with smaller creators. Right. I think I'm very lucky that the creators I work with are all really
if you're established, you can throw your weight around a bit more.
You can. And I think you can also be more picky with the brands you work with.
Yes.
So if you get a brief in and it's horrendous and completely off-brand, then we'll just go, no, we don't want that. No. And there's some examples that you could think about. There's a brief came in and goes, it's just so not right. The paycheck's amazing. Let's decline it because we know the audience is going to receive that horribly. So again, with the long-term view at it, that then you might lose engagement rate and that might sort of continue. So you have to be selective. And also, again, long-term partners, I'll keep going back to it, but once you build a trust with a brand, then it's a lot easier for them to see and try things, especially if you are converting for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you obviously, Jonny, as far as kind of you getting involved in the creator economy, you've clearly had a lot of passion to get where you are, and you must be a content junkie yourself.
Yes, yeah.
I think anyone is in the creator economy. We've kind of talked and mentioned a ton of names. We both nodded along because we know them. But who do you look up to in the creator economy? And I'm not allowing you to say your clients. Well, that's going to be too cringe.
Yeah. I think this is slightly cheating. But Angus, who we mentioned earlier, I think he is superb. I think outside of people I work with, I think Colin and Samir, mentioned earlier on, who are incredible. I've been watching them for probably a decade now. I think that the stuff they put out for free is, again, tremendous. Yeah. So I think they're like a real inspiration in terms of the knowledge they have and the curiosity they have about the creator economy. I really like those guys.
So the More Money Than Sensey segment, it's a fun title. I'll add the sound effect now. What do you see creators waste money on?
I don't know about waste money. I think it's a difficult one, right? You're a young guy. For a lot of creators that are coming up, then spending money, being frivolous. I think spending in general, you have to be careful. I think comparing being a creator to, say, you're on in regular employment, it's not the same linear career progression.
No.
So you're not going to be earning more year on year or making salary progressions like that. It could be a bell curve.
Yeah.
So there is that point where you have to be saving a higher percentage of your earnings, because I think it's not linear. You may in 5 years' time not have the same audience.
Yeah.
So being cautious around that is important. I think saving, again, is underrated as a creator. I think that's what I'd say. There's no one thing in particular, but I think being cognizant that it's not a regular career progression.
Great. And what do you think they underinvest in?
I'd say creators of a mid to large size underinvest in themselves.
Really?
And underinvest in things that would save them time. I think hiring. I think creators underestimate the impact that hiring can have on their capacity and their capacity to earn. I think if you are a creator, if you're a solopreneur or a solo creatorpreneur, you do get to a level whereas I genuinely can't produce any more content. It's just not possible. So bringing in either script writers, more editors, more researchers, if you're doing that style of content, unlocks so much inventory space, like we said earlier.
Yeah.
That I think we'll see more and more of that of creators building teams over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think so as well. I also think it's interesting, the thing that we saw towards the end of last year, where there were a lot of creators that quite publicly came out and sort of reversed that. Like Matt D'Avella is probably the one who did it most publicly, didn't he? He was kind of, because he ended up doing team management. Leon Hendricks, I think, also kind of took a step back from that kind of building side. I'm guessing one of the good things about management is that it gives you an opportunity to have someone else kind of help manage the team, basically, for want of a better word.
Yeah, I think we'll see more of that as well. We have opened a new division in terms of helping creators build teams, helping them do line management, things like that, helping them do contracts, helping them do HR, so they can be that CEO of their company rather than a COO.
Yeah.
So almost looking at it like a fractional COO, where we're the COO for a number of different creators, running their operations so they can sort of have high-level decision-making and make the videos.
Fractional CEO, I like it. It's good. So what's next for 16th?
I think more of the same. I think we're signing lots of really exciting creators at the moment. Lots of expansion into different areas. I think my focus is a lot more on the gaming side of things. I think there's a real potential there with good influence gaming.
Yeah.
For a typically sort of more negative industry, I think we can have a real impact on creators that have a good influence in that space. And yeah, as like I said, more of the creator operations. I think that's a really exciting area to be looking into. Great.
Well, that's it from me. Where can people find out a little bit more about you and 16th, Jonny?
Amazing. Yeah. So we're 16th.co, not com.co, and 16th Talent across all socials. And you can find me on LinkedIn.
Thanks so much for being a part of it. It's been great.
Amazing. Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Anyway, finally, I just wanted to say that as a regulated individual, it's only right that I'm straight talking with my audience. I want to give you the tools to educate yourself about how to manage your personal finances and become financially free. That said, it's important to know that anything through this channel and content is educational and informational only. It is never to be seen as specific financial advice to you. I don't know your unique circumstances, so any generalizations mentioned may not be right for you. Views stated on this podcast and elsewhere are individual. If investing is mentioned, with investing your capital is at risk, past performance is no guarantee of future results, so if you are making any key financial decisions, please do seek professional advice catered to you. Thanks so much for watching and listening.